Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We got a great show planned for you today. First, we're talking about the local South Bend community, and then also how linear TV has evolved over the last decade or two. But first, let me introduce you to today's guest host, Brian Dodge, GM over at WSBT. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a huge honor working with you the last couple of years. So at Gates, obviously we're growing. We're sitting in our new Chevrolet store right now. That'll be opening here in a few weeks. And it's just been really cool to partner with WSBT to be able to share not only our story, but also kind of be a part of what you guys are trying to accomplish. So you're the GM over there.
Correct.
Which means you're like the top dog. But you like to hide behind the scenes a lot, don't you?
I'm blessed to have a very strong leadership team that I'm part of.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even on the news side, on the sales side, all that, you've got a really great team.
I walked into a very good situation.
Yeah. And just to kind of fill the audience in, so you've been here in South Bend, I think, for about 3 to 4 years now.
4 years in July.
There we
That's
go.
Right. Yeah.
4 years next month. Mm-hmm. And then where were you at before that?
So I spent a number of years in the Gulf Coast. I was working with 2 sales teams with Mobile and Pensacola.
That's right.
With Sinclair, who owns the television station here.
Yeah, that's great. And down in that area, I know we've talked about this before, but my dad, my family, and I spent a lot of time during Hurricane Katrina, the recovery from the hurricane down there in 05 to 10. So I spent a lot of time in Biloxi in that area.
Oh, nice area, yeah. So we were over in Spanish Fort.
Yeah.
So right really between Mobile and Pensacola. So I'm very familiar with Biloxi as I went over to New Orleans calling on different clients and agencies over there often. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say makes the difference between the Gulf Coast environment, whether it's the community, whether it's the culture, and then the South Bend environment? Like for me, jambalaya is pretty good down there. We don't have good jambalaya up here, but I think there's a lot of other positives about the South Bend area. What do you love most about it?
Well, Midwesterners as a whole are a little more open and welcoming, I think, than folks in the South. Not to say that Southern people are great, but there definitely is a you're born underneath the azalea bush or tree down there, and we were there nearly 8 years and always considered Yankees.
Yeah.
So. Wonderful people down there. Seriously, made some great friendships, long-lasting friendships, but always kind of an outsider looking in too.
Sure.
So
down there it was almost more, even though they were somewhat welcoming, it's almost like you existed outside of their community.
Correct. I mean,
whatever it was.
And it could have been the Alabama side, and specifically where we were in Mobile, and Mobile and even Spanish Fort.
Sure.
That market is very different and unique in the sense that, as a television market, it's hyphenated as Mobile, Pensacola. Pensacola is obviously in Florida.
Yeah.
Florida and Pensacola area is much more Catholic and flip-flops and tourism.
Yeah.
So not quite so much of that on the Florida side.
Sure.
But once you crossed over into southern Alabama and Mobile and Spanish Fort, it's
a little different.
More blue collar, it's Baptist, it's more factory driven. And definitely more generational in who's lived there their whole lives.
Yeah, exactly. We even saw that because of hurricane recovery. Mm-hmm. We even saw that with homeowners. A lot of times their houses were owned by multiple generations of their family. So I believe that there's just such a tradition in that.
Sure.
And there's just such a huge difference in, not saying that's a bad thing, but the culture is so different here in South Bend.
It's different, right.
So when you came to the South Bend area, the South Bend Elkhart market, what was one of the first things you noticed that you loved?
Well, it was an arrival home for myself, for one thing.
Sure.
So I had grown up in South Bend until I was 12.
You're right.
Father worked at Bendix as a quality control engineer years and years ago.
I didn't know your dad was there.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then we had moved from South Bend at that age. I was 12 to Angola, so just over to the other side of the state, basically.
Sure.
Another manufacturing job and the opportunity to help out on my mom's side of the family farm made it an opportunity for us to make that happen. I went to Indiana University, graduated
time in
from
Bloomington. There you go.
Bloomington, absolutely, go Hoosiers.
Yeah.
And then jumped into television and started the career of making moves, different markets, different career paths. Had the opportunity to live in a number of different markets, but again, coming back then to South Bend, my wife is from St. Joe, Michigan, which is in the DMA, the designated market area. So her family's here. My family's still technically here, Angola. So it was a homecoming of sorts. And again,
it was just coming back home.
It was, and Midwesterners have always been just very welcoming and very friendly, and I just really love the market. College town, diverse marketplace. What's not to love?
Yeah, exactly. And just like you said, it's so diverse between South Bend, between Elkhart, between Mishawaka, between Granger, between Goshen. There's so many different things that happen between these different communities.
The lake, and you can go on down to the Amish.
That's right.
I mean, it's just, and everything in between. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening here that make this a rich environment to experience a lot of different things and also raise a family.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of things that are different and changing here in the area, so linear TV has really changed from what it was not just 20 years ago, but also 10 years ago. So like the last 2 decades, let's say, it's been such an evolution in what it used to be versus what it is today. So what would you say is probably the biggest change versus what it was 10 years ago versus today?
I think it's the variety of choice that consumers have and how they get their content. And we're going to call it content rather than television, just because there's so many different platforms that you can consume it from these days versus 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even just certainly 3 decades ago. So the days of having only 3 networks or 4 networks and then cable and television, cable and radio to choose from are long gone. And so I think that as a television station, we're even embracing new change in terms that we use and wanting to refer to ourselves as content centers and content casts versus newscasts. So there's just been a tremendous change in the technology and how people consume media that's required us to adapt.
Yeah, for sure. So even the new created mediums and maybe even ones that have evolved, it's just amazing how that's changed how people consume. Because, for example, we're on a podcast right now. So I know we do a video version of it. We also do an audio version that goes out on podcasting platforms. And there are people who download those podcasts and they'll listen to them every day when they are ready to on demand.
That's correct.
So there's a lot of things that I'm not saying that people will not sit down and listen to the news, but there's definitely this more on-demand aspect of it as far as staying up to date with news, going out and staying up to date on social with the story as it continues. How has that changed for your multimedia journalists, your MMJs?
Well, I think what to kind of flip that script a little bit in terms of what's changed in what you can consume. I guess you might look at it and say, what's still available that you must consume in live time? Right?
Exactly.
So
because there's certain things that have to be live.
So many choices that you choose from. To your own point, podcasts. You can go back home, turn your television on, and have widgets appear and thousands of different things that you can pick on.
My daughter goes on Apple TV and selects what she wants to watch.
You can spend 20 minutes just trying to figure out what it is that you want to watch. But live sports, live news. Local live content. That is, there's really only 2 or 3 things that are left that are consumed in real time.
I think that's what makes WSBT so different is that you focus on the sports, you focus on that local news, and you really build up that branding around that. And not only with having the great branding there, but also the consistency. You're always having consistent quality, consistent timing, and people know where to find you very easily. As far as like the linear TV, live TV side of it. I think that's so important that you guys have done that over the last, let's say, 20 years. You guys have been a leader in this area.
No, absolutely. And again, that comes down to leadership and culture. And then having a plan and working the plan and focus, being strategic. Our content that we put out is always distinctive, disruptive, disciplined. So those are the 3 Ds that we always want to focus on, making sure that we're delivering to the consumer, to the viewer, what it is that they want, and then being able to give them even more detail on that back on a website or a podcast. Other channels where they can get more granular on what we've just delivered to them, at least on the surface.
Exactly. And you guys have done a good job at taking the same content and putting it in multiple places so that they can continue that story when they want to. So, for example, your newscast, when there's articles covered in there, obviously you put that on website, you put certain ones on social media. So it's kind of cool to see that you are allowing the consumer to consume information and news where they want to.
Yes, and we're trying to do even more. So recognizing that our content centers, our news gathering outlets have libraries of information.
Sure.
Our company actually does a great job or is at least taking steps in working with individuals and opportunities and taking that content and telling a longer story, right?
Yeah.
So, I'll give you an example. We have a station in South Carolina, and I think everyone knows the Murdaugh trials and the attorney and that whole horrible incident with the family. Well, that made national news and was also a big story nationally.
Sure.
But they took advantage of their locality and their interest in the story, and they went deeper with it and developed a podcast series that's got like over 1 million views already in terms of being able to tell that short story on air in a longer story format through a podcast.
How cool.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of times where, so I'm not sure what details they cover on the podcast series, but that's a very popular thing is law-based stuff, crime-based stuff, where you can really dive deep and tell that story in podcast form. People love that.
And it's funny you bring up the crime-based stuff.
Sure.
We actually have a relationship with Anthony Zeiker, who's the creator, producer of all the CSI series. And he's working now with our company, Sinclair, to take advantage of these libraries of information and again tell a docu-series format of that story. So I know that we've got something in the works with the Las Vegas shootings when there was that concert and the guy had holed himself up in the
Monterey Bay
hotel. That's right.
Exactly.
And so there's a ton of content there that's allowing Zeiker himself to put his fingerprints on a 8 mini-series type event.
Yeah, how cool.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that we're about to do is do something crazy with Gates Hot Takes.
Yeah.
So for everybody who's listening, for everybody who's watching, if you want to watch Brian Dodge face the wings of death, check out gatesHotTakes.com. But before we move on to that, what are some exciting things you have coming to WSBT or coming to this local community that you're super excited about?
Well, I think
everything, right?
Everything, right? I mean, that's just such a broad stroke question.
Yeah,
but
sure.
No, I think that next gen television is a big thing that's happening for our market this summer.
Yeah.
And what most people won't realize what that is, the technical term on that is ATSC 3.0.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a few times as far as like cars.
That's right. And so what that'll mean to you as the consumer is that as you've bought a recently made television, maybe in the last year or two, and as you buy televisions forward, they will have chips in them that will be able to receive the over-the-air signal in this new and improved next generation spectrum, which is going to be 4K.
Yeah.
And I think that the opportunities that'll come then from anything from data casting to broadband to improved signals to multiple carrying of different diginets. There'll just be more opportunities and for consumers in the area for sure. Yeah,
exactly. And with ATSC 3.0, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that it works is you're able to broadcast something, let's consider it like a TV signal, for example, and it's able to go to multiple sources all at one time. And you're able to also do that with data as far as the transmission that way. So whether you're in a moving vehicle, whether you're at home on TV, whether you're on a device, you can still watch that broadcasted source.
That live streaming broadcast, correct.
Yeah.
Live over the air.
Exactly, live over the air.
Live over the air, just now done through a higher spectrum. It's going to be fantastic, really.
Yeah.
And it'll allow us then to do more local coverage of local content. So high school sports. And collegiate sports because we'll have the opportunity to put that content on the air, whereas we were limited in capacity prior.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's great. Well, Brian, thank you for coming out today and doing this episode with us. For everybody listening, if you want to watch Hot Takes, you can go to gatesHotTakes.com to watch both Brian and myself suffer while eating hot wings and also walking through some even hotter questions. And everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode. Stay tuned for next time.
Car Talk is presented by Gates Automotive, Northern Indiana's premier local-owned auto dealer, specializing in Toyota, Chevy, and pre-owned vehicle sales and service. Gates Automotive has locations in South Bend, Mishawaka, Granger, and Elkhart. For more information, visit gatesautomotive.com.